Terry Christian got his first TV break warning a politician riots were on the way back in 1981. He has since worked with youth groups on television and on the streets. Sheldon Thomas was once a gang leader. These days he helps kids in London escape gangs. And Conservative author Douglas Murray was once banned from speaking at the LSE for fear he'd provoke a riot. We'd like to know what you think about the riots. Were you a victim or a participant? Call in now to challenge our guests on Skype, or give your views on Twitter or by phone. Phone calls cost up to 5p a minute from a BT landline. Calls from mobiles and other networks may cost considerably more. Texts will be charged at your standard message rate. Well, the events this week showed that parents, schools and even the courts are struggling to control some of our kids. Is it time to let the army have a go and bring back national service? Some blame this week's riots on the breakdown of the family.
They are feral rats. What are those parents doing?
Where parents have failed to teach kids about values and boundaries, the gangs have sometimes stepped in. They act as a surrogate family, setting boundaries and rules, telling members who they should respect, what they should wear and where they can go, giving them a sense of belonging. But if we don't want the gangs to bring up our kids, perhaps the army could. Could the army build in our young a sense of pride, self-respect, identity and community? Would national service, a compulsory period in the military forces, provide an alternative to the gangs? We could follow the example of countries like Israel or Greece who have national service. But it hasn't prevented the youth of Greece rioting. And there would be huge costs involved in calling up, feeding, housing and training each generation. The riots have revealed a country split apart. Would a shared experience of service to the nation heal that rift? Terry, is it tempting to think it might be a solution?
National service, I'm not sure how it squares with the fact that there are record numbers of ex-servicemen in prison at the moment. Hey, but why let the facts get in the way of an instant knee-jerk reaction? Well,
that's the question for our text vote this morning. Should national service be compulsory for all young people? If you think it should, text the word vote followed by yes. If you disagree, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. For full terms and conditions, visit bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live, and we'll bring you the result of the vote at the end of the programme. You're concerned once they come out of national service, what might happen to them?
Well, there's already record numbers of ex-servicemen in prison at the moment. So if you make kids, do national service for what, a year, 2 years, and then you take them out of the army, you put them back onto an estate which has got high unemployment, it's still not necessarily going to give them a job, and then perhaps you'll get a better trained kind of gangster on the street.
Does that completely undermine the argument for it, Douglas?
I think before the last election, David Cameron talked about a form of national service which wouldn't be entirely to do with military training or anything like that. I'd be very in favour of something which, for 6 months or a year, encouraged young people to understand that the society they're living in will only get better if they take a part in it. And if we can instill that somehow by an experience which, as I say, wouldn't have to have a military background to do it. It would be anything, all sorts of volunteering things, working in the charitable sector, working with other, youth groups, all sorts of things you could do. If you could set something up that instilled from an early age the idea that society is theirs and it's in their care, and they have to take part in it.
Like getting them a real job that pays them properly.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But there aren't any, are there?
Sheldon, just apologies for the sound issue we've just had, but Sheldon, you used to be a member of gangs. You are now helping kids come out of gangs. Mm-hmm. What do these young people get from gangs, and could that be replicated in a positive way by sending them for some sort of military service?
First and foremost, I don't agree with national service for a start, straight up. I think if anybody needs national service, it's the politicians, because they're out of control. Some of the things they're coming out and saying, they clearly have a clue, they're clearly clueless, and they're clearly not understanding what's really happening here with young people and the underclass that they're bringing up, well, they're actually causing. And to me, I think, to answer your question, I think families is where you get a sense of identity. Families is where you get a sense of belonging. I don't see how national service can replace family structure. The problem has been...
But could it replace gang structure?
I don't think so. I think the only thing that can replace gang culture is family structure. And I think we need to stay focused on that. I think with all these knee-jerk reactions is absolutely ludicrous. I think what we need to do is stay focused on what the real problems are, which are broken families. And I know we're going to talk about at later points, but we need to stay focused on that. We start doing these knee-jerk reactions about, oh, let's bring back national service or let's introduce national service. I think these politicians are proving that they are not worthy to be in those positions of power.
It's sort of your black cab drivers' solution to the world, isn't it? You know, bring back national service and bring back the birch. And I always just distrust anybody who comes up with what I call these pot noodle instant solutions. That's, you know, right. Just add hot water and stir a bit and they'll work. And of course it's like, you know, you hear a lot of this. You know, we've had the riots this week. You talk about national service now, and I read all these commentators and I feel, you know, in like The Guardian and The Times and The Telegraph, and I feel quite slightly depressed because it's almost like they have their worldview, they shoehorn events in to fit their worldview. I mean, Phillips, and she's saying, oh, it's society's becoming too liberal, that's why they're all rioting and all the rest of it. And you think, well, why aren't the streets of Amsterdam full of Dutch rioters?
Oh, Douglas?
Well, I'm not answering for any of the numerous people who Derry's criticising, but I mean, just the first thing I'd say is this, that no one is saying that a national service, for instance, would replace family. The problem is that we have across our society a whole set of problems that are going on.
Which is underpinned by family, broken families.
One of the, absolutely, if not the central thing underpinning it is the breakdown of the family. No doubt about that. But you can't sort of will that or wish it to happen. You have to assist it to happen somehow, and you have to assist people to feel part of a community, a part of a nation. Major
General Tim Cross worked on reconstruction in Iraq. Major General Tim Cross, what would be the value for these young people, who perhaps some of them have come from broken homes, to then be taken out of those homes and given compulsory national service? Tim, are you there?
I am here, yeah.
Ah, yes, right.
Good morning.
I'm terribly sorry. We seem to have gremlins on the line, but we can hear you now. So, yeah, what would be the value of this national service?
Let me say that I think that to begin with, I suspect the reality is, and your panel has touched on this a bit, the practical implications and the lack of political will means that bringing back national service as it was is just not going to happen. The real question is, why do so many people seem to think that we need to bring it back? And I do think we need to be careful here. The military, like any other organisation, is made up of flawed human beings, and we don't get it entirely right. But I think that there are a couple of key issues. Firstly, we have a large number of very positive male role models in place in the military. And from top to bottom, we've leaders of genuine character, I think, and courage. Not just physical courage, but I think more importantly, moral courage. So unlike many organisations, the military are not afraid to talk about and then put into practice, and indeed we codify it and teach it, things like selfless commitment, loyalty, integrity, sense of duty, trust and respect and so on. So the military is a place where we have rights, but we also have responsibilities, and we teach it to people. So that when they go out on patrol in places like Iraq and Afghanistan every day, knowing there's a fair to middling chance they're going to be injured or killed, it's because they sense in the military a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of purpose, and they feel part of what we call the regimental family. I mean, and the word family has been used a lot this morning.
Sheldon?
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that organisations on the front line teach. We've got organisations in places like Hackney, Newham, that actually teach exactly what he's talking about, but are completely underfunded. You know, how can you just switch the argument from let's just do national service as some sort of knee-jerk reaction and not focus on this so big society thing that David Cameron was painting? And the minute you get a chance to say, okay, we need to kind of reinvest in these frontline organisations that teach identity, that teach how to deal with empowerment, that teach how to bring a young person from that feeling of helplessness into one of hope. And then now you want to say, oh, we're not going to invest in those organisations. What we should do is just kind of, let's go and bring back national service.
The implication is that it's all young people in those areas. I mean, I grew up on a council estate. Okay, it was a different era, less pressures, I would have said, and there were some options to get out of it. There was some social mobility back then, but the majority of them were appalled, innocent bystanders. to these riots.
I want to put another point to you, Major General Tim Cross, that in fact Terry raised a little earlier, which is that, well, firstly, people can have problems even while they're in the army, and secondly, that when people come out of military service, there are well-documented accounts of people struggling to readjust.
Well, record numbers of ex-servicemen in prison at the moment.
So you may have a situation where you have these young people, we train them up in the army, and then let them loose on the streets. Would that be a better situation?
Well, I think, I don't know that there's record numbers, actually. I'm not sure where that fact comes
yes,
from. Yes,
from the Guardian, 2008. From the Guardian, 2008, just in case you
I
missed
understand
it.
that you've made your point several times. If you could allow me to make my point, that would be very kind.
No, you asked me where it came from, I told you.
Okay, so let him finish.
Yeah, yes. If you could let me finish, because I haven't had an opportunity of trying to reply to the question, so that would be very kind. Thanks very much.
You asked me a question, answered it.
Okay.
Guardian,
no, I don't think I did ask you a question, actually.
Okay.
I don't think I did ask you a question.
All right, Terry, you've mentioned your source. Now, Major General Tim Cross, have your say.
Yeah. I did start off by saying that the military organisations, like any other organisation, is made up of flawed human beings, and it would be idle to suggest that, we don't have problems in the military. Of course we do. But it is in the context of the regimental system and the military system and so forth. So, we have our problems, but the regimental family, etc., is there to deal with it and to try to bring it together. When people leave, undoubtedly we have people who end up in trouble. And I think, with situations like Iraq and Afghanistan, we're going to have a lot of young people coming out of the military over the next few years who are going to end up with the post-traumatic stress syndrome, those sorts of issues, and they will end up in trouble, I think. But I don't think that, detracts from the fact that the military structure, the military organisation and what it does is a place that people look at and then say, yeah, we could do with a bit more of this. And I do agree with your panel, but I've got no problem at all in suggesting that we should be investing in this sort of thing in different areas of our system, our education system, the clubs, the sort of places that your other panel members have been talking about, and I would absolutely endorse that.
Lindsay German is from the Stop the War Coalition. Those values that Major General Tim Cross mentions, loyalty, commitment, a sense of identity, and positive male role models, those are hard to argue with, aren't they?
Well, they do come from all sorts of different institutions in society, and you have to look at the army. Is essentially the role of the army, particularly in recent years, has been a violent role, a role to do with killing. Now, what happens is, as Terry has pointed out, you have to go to some length to train people to be desensitized enough to do this kind of thing. And actually, many of them face very great problems, both within the army and when they leave the army, not just in prison, domestic violence, housing problems, hopelessness, all these kind of things, alcoholism. I think it's wrong to suggest that sort of what we've seen in days on.
Okay, Lindsay, I'm going to interrupt you, not because we don't respect what you're saying, but simply because we do have sound problems with your line, and we've heard your point. And yeah,
can I just stress again that the ideas of national service that have been suggested by politicians at the moment aren't, I say, a solely one-size-fits-all military solution to it. But I think it might be worth thinking of a more nuanced approach to this, I say, which David Cameron suggested, whereby there are types of experience, types of national service which have nothing to do with the military that may well suit and fit and help train up young people, not only have a sense of community, have a sense of belonging, but also help them into the career which they'd go into. So it's much more nuanced than just throwing people around to march in a square.
Can I just say this, yeah? We're talking about the army. I'm going to bring some own truth here. This is what the young people I work with see. I work with gang members. They see £4 to £5 billion being spent on a war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in Libya, and all these places. And then they see the same Prime Minister coming back here telling everybody that there's no jobs, there's going to be massive redundancies, no apprenticeships. So what you're saying is let's further give more investment to the army to go and deal with a problem that should be invested locally to organisations. And no, let me finish. What I'm saying is this. I'm not going to sit and just listen to us talk about the army as if to say that that is some sort of answer, when actually what is the answer is investment into local communities, organisations that are struggling. Because £4 billion, £5 billion on a war that no one's asked for.
The people of Libya are suffering, and the people of Afghanistan are suffering as well.
I'm going to tell you this now. People on the streets of London don't care. What they care about is their personal life.
Yeah, £200 million a day for Libya.
They care about the fact that they ain't got no job. They care about...
It might not be an either or. It might not be allowing allowing genocide in Libya or you getting more money for your group in London?
For you to suggest that it's okay to spend £4 to £5 billion of our money in this country on a war that none of us have asked for.
And there are plenty of people who don't think that the Libyan government should be allowed to commit genocide against their own people.
When you say
genocide, you don't have to be for that.
Can I put those points? Can I put those precise points to Dr. Barak Ariel? No, Terry. Terry, I want to interrupt because we have a guest on webcam, Dr. Barak Ariel. If you can hear us, Barak, you look at this from, in a sense, two sides. You did Israeli national service, and you are a criminologist at Cambridge University.
That's correct.
What value could that national service have then in preventing crime?
Well, there are two things. The first thing is that it gives them something to do while they're at the age that's very vulnerable. I mean, if you're 18, 19, 20, and you don't have something to do, then at the same time, instead of being out on the streets, you can actually go out and do some national service. Now, we spoke about the military and the army, but there are all sorts of things you can do as a national service that you don't have to see combat. I understand the argument about Iraq and Afghanistan, but that's a different issue. The issue here is whether this kind of intervention, if you will, social intervention, will decrease crime in many ways, and I think it could, because the first thing that it does, it introduces a melting pot between different sections of society. Different people from different backgrounds come together, and they do something for the common goal, and it seems to me like a good idea, and we have a pretty positive experience with this in a lot of places around the world. Yeah, it doesn't have to be military conscription. It can be other things. It could be technology. It can be computers, police, hospitals, schools. It could be all sorts of things. I also think that you can tie up the national service to different benefits. Maybe child benefits, no, but child tax credits, yes. So if you do, for example, a couple of years of military service or any other service, then maybe you can get tuition paid for by the government or housing, any other sort of governmental aid.
Thank you. A viewer has got in touch. Eric Lequisane, you served in the army, Eric. Do you think more young people should?
No, I don't, because I don't think the army should be used as a probation service. The army is a small, highly trained, technical, streamlined fighting force. It's not there to teach the sort of people we've seen on television on our screens last week, to teach them respect, manners and behaviour that they should have been taught from day one at home. And I think it's quite wrong that the army should even be considered as a training ground for those sort of people. Quite frankly, I don't think the government could afford to do it anyway. The infrastructure costs in building new barracks, in providing the military staff to train those people, the money could be better spent on addressing some of the issues that a member of your panel identified where there is funding.
Yes, Eric, thank you so much for getting in touch. Well, that is our text poll today. Should national service be compulsory for all young people? If you think it should, then text the word vote followed by yes. If you think like Eric, you should not, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate, and you have around 20 minutes before the poll closes. It's a national trait, isn't it? The police get it in the neck when they're too tough on the streets, and then we lambast them the next week for not being tough enough. This week, David Cameron suggested plastic bullets, water cannon, even backup from the army. Have these 7 days in August made up your mind?
This is a public order warning. Will all members of the public please disperse now or force may be used?
As the law on our streets broke down, citizens were forced to defend themselves.
If the Met's not here, then tough luck. We'll take the law into our own hands.
Would they have had to have done this if the rioters had feared the police more? It took 16,000 police officers to calm the capital. Those numbers are unsustainable. David Cameron said this week the police were too timid in their response, and they need the confidence to use more force.
Whatever tactics the police feel they need to employ, they will have legal backing to do so. Nothing is off the table.
In just 1 week, weapons associated with the Troubles in Northern Ireland were being suggested for use on the streets of England. But some argue it was the use of force in the police shooting of Mark Duggan which triggered the violence in Tottenham. So would more police violence simply breed more public violence? There are already concerns over how much force the police used in previous civil unrest. And some say that criticism has made the police too wary of cracking down this time. Others say those out on the streets deserved all they got when the police retook control. Well, if you have a webcam, you can make your point this morning to us on Skype. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, phone, text or email, all the details on the screen. And we welcome to the programme a vicar from Hackney. The Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin is also chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons. Very good morning and welcome, Rose. Would more proactive policing, perhaps more force, have calmed things down, shut things down earlier?
I don't know about force. What I do know is that perhaps more police presence would have been helpful, but clearly, as the police have said themselves, they didn't have the numbers at the time to put out on the street. I was in Hackney at the time when they were lobbing things. There was a thin blue line of police officers, and I was shattered to see the bricks and the bottles, etc., being lobbed at people who are ordinary human beings. These are, you know, the police, they're not an alien force. They are people's husbands and wives and brothers and fathers, etc. And so they needed reinforcement, they got reinforcement, and we saw a calm.
And Douglas, it was flooding the streets with police, wasn't it, that actually brought this to an end?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there have been two things quickly. One is that there have been some people who've gone way over the top of what they think should now happen. I mean, we're sitting in Belfast. Belfast knows well that if you start putting soldiers on the streets, things can escalate very fast indeed. And I think that's a very bad idea that's been suggested. But I think that the second thing to say there is that there has been a terrible loss of public confidence in the police by the fact that a large number of members of the public have seen police holding back, allowing not just criminality to go on, not just looting to go on, but also in some cases members of the public being attacked by those people, and the police seeming not to have taken the role that they should have done to protect the public. So there has been a huge loss of confidence this week in the police, and it's going to take a lot of work and effort for the police to get that confidence back.
Terry? Too timid? Should be more forceful?
I kind of agree with what Douglas has said. You know, certainly, you know, there's a feeling that the police force have been slightly emasculated, possibly because of the prosecutions over, you know, Ian Tomlinson's death. You know, he was an innocent, harmless man, you know, sort of, and all the kettling that went on and everything like that, you know, killed by the police. But surely there's got to be a small space somewhere between kind of, you know, harming an innocent man and causing his death, you know, and also then, like, you know, just being spectators to what was like, you know, acts of looting and criminality. Because we keep talking about young people. Now, I can tell you now, in Manchester, the majority of the people who were arrested and involved in the looting were kind of way into the, like, 20s, 30s and 40s. You know, there were hardened criminal gangs involved. So really, you know, there's different causes to each of these riots everywhere. The police were like spectators. Now, they said they didn't have enough numbers on the street, but they did sit back and let it go on. And I can say another thing now. I've been out in Manchester city centre and seen people getting beaten up, reported it to a policeman in the past, and they're not interested anyway.
Ian MacDonald is a former ex-assistant chief constable at Merseyside Police, and you dealt with the Toxteth riots, Ian. How much force is it possible to use in these situations? Are the police unconfident about using the necessary force?
Well, the police have clear guidelines on the levels of force that they can use, and it has to be proportionate, and it has to be in response to the situation. I have to say, once a riot is underway, nobody's ever policed one perfectly. And what the police need is some powers to stop these people from assembling, setting off to commit offences, and then committing the offences.
So when you hear, when you hear talk of rubber bullets, water cannon, and possibly bringing in the army, do you think, yes, that's necessary, or that's completely over the top?
Well, yes and no. So far as rubber bullets and water cannon are concerned, our colleagues in the Police Service of Northern Ireland will advise us on that. As long as it's proportionate, that's okay. So far as the army coming in, I've yet to see a situation in the last century where the army going into a situation of civil unrest has brought it to an end.
Michael Winner. So Michael Winner is chairman of the Police Memorial Trust. Is there a danger, Michael Winner, that using more aggression can actually increase aggression?
Well, you can't increase it much more than what we've seen in the recent riots. I mean, short of them stringing people up from lampposts, I don't see how it could increase. I think what the public, and I include myself, felt particularly in the first couple of days is that there didn't appear to be, and I'm not blaming the police officers, although there may have been some lack of management, enough attempt to stop the rioting. You've got to bring in whatever is necessary. The army, rubber bullets, water cannon, gas, I don't care what it is. Citizens should not be subjected to this.
But
property should not be subjected to this.
Michael,
and we've always had this softly approach. This is where it's got us, nowhere.
We've not really had a softly approach in the past. You know, certainly if I think of 81 and what happened in Moss Side, the police went in particularly hard on the last night of rioting and lost a lot of support from that community because, you know, some of the punishments handed out were unfair. But I think what it was, I don't think there are enough police numbers, and all this idea of plastic bullets and water cannon, you know, face the facts, you cannot afford to cut the police service.
Michael?
No, of course there should be more police, I quite agree, and I think where they have been restrained, the officer on the beat and facing these rioters, is they've been restrained mentally by the knowledge that if they do anything, that the politically correct brigade will be charging them with breach of human rights.
Well, it's not politically correct brigade in the case of Ian Tomlinson. He was an innocent bloke. You know, so you know that can happen. Sometimes, you know, the police can get out of hand, but there's got to be a small space somewhere between that and just acting as a spectator. Now, the police in Manchester said that they were outnumbered at the time by the rioters, and that's why they didn't go in.
They were clearly outnumbered initially. They were clearly outnumbered. I mean, what I saw in Hackney, there were much more people rioting or throwing bricks, etc., than there were police. Whether they were not expecting that vast numbers to gather so quickly on the street. We're in new times. And I think it is unfair in that context to expect the police officers to go into that fracas and not only hurt themselves, but injure other people. There were probably even more spectators in Hackney than there were police. And so the question has got to be asked of the community. We're asking the police to put their lives on the line. And I'm wondering, why weren't we, the community who were gathered, spectating, watching what was going on, become that thin blue line, as it were, in terms of being the borderline between the police and our young people.
But because there were big criminal elements in these areas involved in these riots, and the locals are scared of them too. Now, for years, as long as it's been confined to those areas, the criminality, the police have turned a blind eye. You know, I've never heard David Cameron talk about how disgraceful it all is. Well, yeah, because
those criminal elements are our children and our people in our community.
Scared of them.
Well,
they feel scared and intimidated.
In the day, David Cameron, who's been in office a very long time, is talking about zero tolerance. And of course he's right, but what we've had up to now is total tolerance. We've tolerated every nonsense that's going on. The citizen has been pushed aside, and I don't accept for 1 minute that we shouldn't be tougher and, if necessary, rougher.
Well, no one's saying that we shouldn't be tougher. What I'm saying is it's been allowed to go on. Of course, when it starts affecting London, when it's the Olympics, and it's like something must be done. Now, the fact is we've had gangs with guns on the streets, turning areas into no-go zones for like years.
No, of course something should have been done then. It's
so why wasn't it?
Of tolerance beyond belief.
Douglas.
There clearly is a swinging back and forth from the police. You know, we saw the G20 riots, we saw the response to the policing there when the police failed to stop people storming public buildings in London in the anti-tuition fees protests earlier last year. And just one quick thing, because this has become a big political tool this week. This issue about the cuts in police numbers. Nobody, I think, in agreement from any political party or anything else, actually wants to see fewer police on the streets. And Labour, I think, have been behaving quite disgracefully in trying to make this political point this week. What the coalition cuts are trying to do is not to cut the numbers of police on the street, but to cut the number of people sitting at desks writing out reports.
Well, you can't get the convictions, so without the paperwork.
In terms of numbers, you can have as many or more police on the street if you free them up from the paperwork.
But Douglas, they can't get the convictions without the paperwork. They won't go through court.
What we also want. Hang on, Michael. Too lenient. The courts are far too lenient. The sentencing is pathetic. And Mrs. Thatcher would have dealt with this in seconds.
Well, she's
in places like Hackney also, in our inner cities, we also want a police force that is going to be respectful of the people that it is policing. Because time and time again, I have mothers, parents, fathers who tells me that they are genuinely, and when I hear the young people say it, I sometimes take it with a pinch of salt, but when I hear mothers who are distressed because the police disrespect even the parents themselves, standing there with their children. If the police disrespect the parents, then the parents almost lose their moral right to engage with their children.
Well, let's speak to one of those. Let's speak to...
What I'm saying is this is a myth. This idea that... Well, what would you know, Michael? You don't live in one of those areas and haven't ever done.
Well,
now, I can tell you now,
there
is a myth about the police being soft in these areas.
Well, you don't live in those areas either.
I grew up in an area like that. I've got a 19-year-old nephew pulled to the floor in the street in Preston by police with a gun to his head, has never committed any crime other than the fact that he's black. Right? Now, if that kind of thing is going on, it's going on out of your sight, it's going on out of my sight, but it happens a lot more than you think. So it isn't soft policing in the way that you think.
Let's speak to a 19-year-old now. Stephen Eater is from Lewisham in London. Stephen, what is your experience of relations with police where you live?
Well, hi everyone. Growing up around this area, I've had my fair shares of ups and downs with police officers. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say all of them are all bad, but my experience is most of it has been bad from the police officers. You know what I mean? I get stopped and searched so often, and you know, that it gets to me. Like, why am I always getting stopped and searched? Why is it always me? I'll give you an example of what happened. One time when I was working, I went to the toilet next to the centre where I was working, and the police officer came out of his car, started questioning me, answered all his questions. Another guy that works with me came over and said, "Hey, police officer, don't worry, he works with me." And the police officer turned around and went to the guy, "It's all right, I don't care about you, you can go away, I want to talk to him." And I was like, what do you mean? He just said I work with him and I haven't done anything wrong. Why am I still here? And he was still questioning me and said, "Oh, I'm going to nick you." I asked him, "Why would you want to nick me for? I haven't done anything wrong." You know what I mean? And then it's all stupid things that gets people really upset with the police.
My nephew's had it 4 or 5 times, and he didn't even get an apology. They had a gun to his head. He was shaking for days.
Stephen, if you knew that the police could use more force, and we've heard the phrase rougher and tougher, how would that affect?
But that's the thing, though. It wouldn't help. It wouldn't help the relationship at all. You know what I mean? Because you need the police officers to be able to engage with the community. You know what I mean? You need to be able to engage with the community. If you can't do that, you can't break that stereotype of all police are bad.
Douglas, if we want these young people we've seen to show compassion and love and respect and be peaceful, as Stephen's saying, shouldn't we treat them that way?
Absolutely. Look, but there are 2 sides to this. Firstly, of course the police shouldn't be goading, or of course the police shouldn't be doing anything like that. They shouldn't be making those sort of mistakes. However, those mistakes, when they are made, can be on occasions remedied and so on. They can be addressed. But I just wanted to say that the other side of this equation is this. We can't let people off when they do criminal acts from being subjected to a rigorous examination publicly afterwards. Let me give an example. A lot of people get stopped and searched, and I mean the gentleman you got on here is an example. I mean, I've been stopped and searched. Most people I know in London have been stopped and searched. But let me just give you a quick example. It would never occur to me, and I know it wouldn't.
Douglas, have you really been stopped and searched by police?
Twice.
And how have they gone about doing it?
is it useful to go into? I mean,
okay.
Yes. I mean, they stopped this several years ago. They stop you. They ask you to show what you're carrying. They ask you to empty your pockets, all that sort of thing. Now, I don't like that. But my own feeling is this: is if you think you're doing a job, you do it decently. I don't mind. I'm inconvenienced, but if this is what's needed to keep the community safe, then fine. What would never occur to me for a moment is to store up resentment from that and to end up somewhere down the line using it as an excuse to steal trainers. And some people have been doing that.
No, let's not condone what went on in the riots.
If in a month you are stopped half a dozen times or even 20 times, and young people on the streets, they tell us that they are constantly stopped. There is the assumption. Now, I'm not against stop and search. I want guns to be taken off our street. I want knives to be removed because it means that our young people will be alive.
Richard Seymour writes about police brutality. Richard, you can't deny, though, that as people watched those riots, they wondered why police weren't showing either more force or either more confidence in using that force. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there was a complete breakdown in policing, and I think that tends to happen when riots break out. I mean, that's one of the conditions for riots breaking out. But let's not lose sight of what happened here. The spark that triggered this was an example of hostile policing in which a young man had his life taken away. Subsequently, there was a protest that was largely peaceful until a 16-year-old girl, several independent witnesses say this, was beaten up by riot officers. Now, I live in Enfield, and as you know, Enfield was one of the areas that was hit. In the afternoon, in the build-up to the riots taking place, the police were around the whole area, getting shops to close down. There were riot bands all over the place. There were dozens of riot police. There were apparently hundreds of arrests. That's what storekeepers locally reported. So it's not for lack of preparation that the riots actually took place. I'm afraid that what's happening here is that underlying this is that there are real grievances, and it's easy to reduce this to poverty or spending cuts, and I think these are important issues, but a much more cutting-edge issue is injustice. People talk about soft policing, but between 1998 and 2010, 333 people died in police custody. Okay. Not one officer was convicted of any of those deaths. And that's why communities and elsewhere don't have confidence in police or the IPCC. And lastly, just one other.
And I would like to hear that one other thing, but unfortunately, we are very tight for time, and we're slightly losing your microphone there. So I'm going to switch to Stuart Davidson, who used to be a police officer in this country and left to go and work in Canada. And do you think that there is a difference there that English police, British police could learn from?
Well, I wasn't armed in the UK. I had nothing in the UK, and now I have a taser, a pistol, and an assault rifle, and the training to use them, and it makes a big difference when you're policing the streets.
It makes a big difference. Why?
Because bad people are scared of you.
Do you think that is the problem in England, that there is not enough fear of the police?
Well, I don't know. I was fighting with people every other week almost in England, and now nobody fights with the police. Nobody, everyone does what you say, and people are more respectful of the police here than they are in England. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's because we carry guns or not, but generally people wave at me with all their fingers and do as they're asked.
A wealthier society as well, isn't it? More egalitarian.
Let's bring in a couple of texts from viewers on this. Jerry from Londonderry, a couple of hours rioting in Belfast or Derry, and the plastic bullets and water cannon are out. One rule, it seems, in Northern Ireland, another in England. Chris from London says the answer is obviously more police. The riots kicked off when there weren't enough on the streets, then we drafted in more from outside London, and the riots stopped or disintegrated. And David from Merseyside has emailed in to say he was an officer present during the riots in Salford and was one of 12 officers under attack by up to 300 rioters. He had bricks and bottles thrown at him, and 7, including himself, were injured. And he says, we stayed until the fire was put out. So Terry saying we did nothing
No, I was
really
talking about in
annoys
Manchester
me.
City Centre in Salford. They're outnumbered and they're up against a very hardcore criminal element as well in Salford. So, as I said, you know, these are very complex issues. There is no one, you know, sort of pot noodle solution, add instant water and this will work. It's a lot of different things. But are we going to get a Scarman report like we got in 1981? I doubt it very much.
We'll have to wait and see. And we're going to
reports.
And the big question is, why is it happening in this country?
And we're going to discuss that in just a moment, because still to come on Sunday Morning Live, our kids are going on the rampage to steal trainers and flat-screen televisions. Over in Chile, students are rioting for a better education. Should we be surprised? Is our own obsession with material wealth to blame for the riots? You can join in by webcam. You can make your views known by phone, online or by email. And remember, keep voting too in our text poll. The question this morning, should national service be compulsory for all young people? If you think it should, text the word vote followed by yes. If you think not, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. And you have around 5 minutes before the poll closes. Well, above the din of the riots and the clamour of voices calling for retribution, there were 3 voices that many people thought stood out this week. Perhaps the most effective in calming the tension was Tariq Jahan, father of Haroon Jahan. Tariq said, "I lost my son. Step forward if you want to lose your sons. Otherwise, calm down and go home." Then there was the Malaysian student who was robbed and assaulted. Ashraf Haziq said, though, "Britain is great. Before I came here, I was very eager. And I haven't got any ill feeling about what happened." And then grandmother Pauline Pierce had the courage to say what so many people were thinking when she simply told off the rioters very loudly. "We're not all gathering together and fighting for a cause," said Pauline. "We're running down Foot Locker and TV shops." Well, Rose, you talked about why the community didn't step up and speak out. That's exactly what Pauline did, isn't it?
Yes, that's what she was saying, and there was something real in what she was saying. But underlying all of that, we live in a society where it is all celebrity. It is, you know, it's get it today, footballers, you know, people doing their own thing, people behaving badly, you know, and society says, it's okay. We live in a society where we tell our children are 40 years old, that they can get condoms, they can get birth control. Parents doesn't need to be involved.
But meanwhile, we have a parent here, Tariq Jahan, who suffered the most grievous loss and yet spoke out so eloquently and powerfully.
Mr. Jahan, I think, is the outstanding hero of this week. Such an extraordinarily moving. I don't know how he spoke, I have to say, so soon after the death of his son, the murder of his son.
And you could imagine that in that situation, the things that someone might have said.
Absolutely. I mean, what you see here is the importance of a man with moral courage.
And faith.
Even in this terrible period in his life. And he could have, as you said, he could have called for retribution. He could actually have ignited the most terrible war in his city, and he didn't. He said exactly what needed saying. These are people losing their lives.
And meanwhile,
he did show a lot of courage. And what he didn't say was, do you know, would there have been any need for me, my son, and those other young people to have been there trying to protect those shops? Had there been enough police on the street?
Meanwhile, Ashraf Haziq, this Malaysian student who people also watched on YouTube, could easily have said, "What's going on here? I'm leaving and getting out." And again said, "I'm staying, this is still a great place." And a Facebook page is set up and people raise money for him.
The big irony is that students are getting mugged all the time. You know, it happens in Manchester a lot, you know, because they come from, you know, nice little leafy suburbs, they're suddenly living in an inner city area, they're quite naive, they get mugged, it just gets ignored what happens to them. I think more fuss is being made about it because, you know, we've had the riots this week, you know, we've seen Clapham, we've seen Tottenham.
I would disagree. It's not so much that more fuss is being made. What you have
This is what
here,
I think, though.
We all know the story of the Good Samaritan. What we have here is a guy who's bloody beaten up, you know, blood all over. And people come, and instead of actually helping and assisting him, they start stealing from him. That's what the fuss is, you know. I was horrified.
But it's also they're worried about London's PR coming up to the Olympics.
It wasn't that. It was seeing a wicked thing done on top of a wicked thing.
My horror was not that it was all in London.
But Terry, it may happen a lot, but the fact that this happened and people showed compassion in their response.
Well, they would. They should publicise all those muggings.
Douglas, I just want to ask, those voices seem to ring out so loudly. Do you think that for many people, what those three people said sort of speaks much louder than what they're hearing from politicians or other leaders?
It's possible. I mean, we need all these voices in the discussion. We need people on the ground to say it. We need politicians to say some of it. Sometimes you need politicians to speak out a bit more bravely on some of this stuff. But I think the fact is nobody will remember what the politicians said this week. They'll remember those people.
Well, you've been voting in our text poll this morning. We asked the question right at the beginning of the programme, should national service be compulsory for all young people? I need to let you know that the poll is closing now, so please don't text anymore. Your vote won't count, but you could still be charged, and we'll bring you the result at the end of the programme. So let's dig a little further into the possible causes. The French riot about pensions, the Greeks riot about cuts, the English loot Foot Locker for new trainers. What does this say about us? It could be just a few delinquents grabbing what they could in the chaos. Or is our own consumer greed having some unexpected consequences? Rioting is nothing new. People have risen up over race, policing, the poll tax, even globalisation. And it's not unusual for the police or public property to be targeted. But this time, some of the motivation appeared to be pure greed.
Why are you going to miss the opportunity to get free stuff that's worth like loads of money?
Are these people just violent criminal scum, disregarding human life in the pursuit of mobiles and trainers? Or were they just copying standards they'd seen elsewhere? After all, the nation's favourite pastime until recently was shopping and getting into debt to do it. And many of our role models are celebrities with lavish lifestyles. And it goes right to the top. Recently, many bankers, politicians, press and police have seemed much more interested in money than morals and suffered very little for it. There can be no excuse for the destruction of lives and property we saw this week. But are they just a dark mirror on the actual values of our consumer society? Can the blame for the riots fall on our own greed? You can join in by webcam or make your point by phone, text, email or online. Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin, you've already mentioned role models. What do you think? Consumerist, materialistic role models, are they partly to blame?
All of that is part of the equation. But you know, within our society, we have what I can only describe as a poverty of spirit, a moral vacuum where anything goes. And what we have seen in the rioting today is a result of that.
But is that because parents aren't inculcating it, or is it because society as a whole is telling young people they need to have the latest, but not enabling them to have it?
The message from society is that you can have whatever you want. You have a right to have whatever you want, to do whatever you want to do. And then now that we have the right, society is saying, call your children back in. Which children are we to call back in? The same children that you've taken away from us and taken away our responsibility as parent to parent? There is a problem there. Successive governments down the line have erased parental responsibility and given children rights. Now the children have risen up, and that's what we see. Because who are their mentors? Their mentors are celebrities, their mentors are footballers, their mentors are people themselves who sometimes don't have good moral values.
i.e. the local gangster in some areas.
Or, Douglas, are their mentors, perhaps, some might say, the bankers who they might think were responsible for this financial meltdown but didn't seem to be punished, or the MPs who fiddled their expenses,
the first
but
thing
only
is we
a handful
we
of
have
them
to
were
get away
punished.
from this thing of taking off any blame from anyone, and I don't think anyone here is. But the people who did the looting, the people who committed the acts of criminality, they are responsible for their actions, and that's the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there underlying causes to that? Are there underlying issues that need addressing? Sure. I mean, we do live in Britain in the most extraordinarily sort of debased society. All of the people shoved on to young people as role models now are vacuous, empty, mainly lacking in any kind of achievement of the kind that a generation ago would have been thought of as an achievement. And, you know, young people notice this. They notice this vacuum. You can see it. You can see it in the behaviour of children on the streets. You can see it in what they aspire to. You can see it in the whole...
So are you going to tally up what, you know, the kind of corruption? I mean, there is a rich seam of immorality goes throughout society. So you've got your MPs trousering their expenses. You've got, you know, bankers who, you know, impoverished all of us, really, paying themselves massive bonuses.
And
you've got politicians intertwining with, what is it, corrupt press proprietors.
In each of these cases,
you know, and what seems to be corrupt police.
Yeah,
okay. So we've got all of that going on.
They're unified by the same thing, which is an
so
inability...
they should all be punished, shouldn't they?
Absolutely. They are unified by the same thing, an unwillingness to take responsibility for your own actions.
So, yes, but this is what's interesting.
And that's what the MPs did. They did not take responsibility for their actions.
Because I know you say this thing about multiculturalism, you know, you don't believe in different solutions for different, you know, cultures and all that. So let's get it down to, like, David Cameron, that kid who, what is it, he was looting, wasn't he, and he stole a bottle of water from Lidl. He's been sent down for 6 months. And yet David Cameron, when it comes to Andy Coulson, I believe in giving everybody a second chance.
We'll see what happens to Andy Coulson.
Boff Wally is from the group Chumbawamba, and you call yourself an anarchist, Boff. Was this some sort of moral anarchy?
No, I don't think the riots, the looting had anything to do with anarchy. I think that as an anarchist, you can look at why this thing happened. Instead of everyone just having this, what Terry Christian calls a pot noodle solution, and looking at it in a microcosm, look at the bigger picture, which is years and years and years of this moral vacuum, years of bankers running away with the money, years of you know, big companies getting away with £6 billion tax dodgers. David Cameron's not doing anything about that. Someone steals something from a shop and they get sent down. It's ridiculous.
Craig Farnington is from the Institute of Ideas. Craig, what do you think? Are people just dressing this all up with some sort of political theory when it's criminality, or is there something deeper going wrong in our society? Craig, let's switch your microphone on and start you up all over again. Go ahead.
Yeah, calling it criminality is really just stating the obvious. But I think you're right to say there's definitely something wrong with the people who carried out these acts. They don't have any regard for the people who are around them. They don't have any sense of community or sense of involvement in society.
Is he talking about the bankers or the rioters now? Or both?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about the bankers, the rioters, the politicians, and the kind of fated sort of businessmen like Philip Green who managed to dodge paying £1 billion in tax?
Terry.
Oh, no, of tax avoidance. Nothing wrong with that, not against the law.
Well, it isn't against the law, that's clear.
Craig?
I mean, there's nothing... These people, they committed crimes, but to justify it by saying, well, there's a banker doing it as well, I mean, that's not justifying it at all.
Let Craig have his say, Terry.
No, well, he's putting words in my mouth.
It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to say just because somebody else is doing something.
I'm not giving them any excuses either.
Terry, stop talking over Craig. Let's listen to let's listen to what he has to say.
As long as you don't put words in my mouth.
Okay, he's not going to do that, Craig.
Well, no, I mean, you just said that the people who have viewed these bankers.
Yeah, I think they're all dreadful. They're all criminals. That's what I think.
On an iPod.
Terry, I'm going to have to ask you to let Craig have his say.
Oh, yeah, he can, as long as he doesn't mention what I said. Okay. Stick to what he's got to say.
Craig, please persevere, and we'll finally get to hear your point.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I mean, these people stole from the people around them. They have no sense of community. They had no sense of the people around them. They did not care, and the reason for that is because they've been robbed of a sense of community by a government who continually interferes in their lives, who gives them no reason to trust the other people, gives them no reason to rely on the other people around them. So it's no surprise then that they might come around and steal from those very people that they live alongside, burn down their businesses, and burn down the people who are actually trying to get ahead and try to do this. I mean, you talked about consumerism. I mean, the people who had these businesses they're burning down, well, what they want as well is nice shoes, nice TVs. Consumerism doesn't explain it at all.
Yep. Just quick. Yes. I mean, as important as focusing on the things that have been attacked, actually, it's very interesting. You mentioned earlier that, the things that haven't been attacked in these riots, and this does tell us a lot about the objectives of these people. Public buildings were not attacked. This was not a pre-revolutionary France situation.
Oh, no, it's criminal.
Things selling just sort of borderline breadline goods were not attacked as the first priority. The first priority was luxury goods, consumerist products, and so on. And the thing about this, just quickly, is that it shows us that when criminals and there's an outbreak of violence as there is there, some people jump in and take an opportunity, and most of them did it, and they took what they wanted, and it was stealing, plain and simple.
Katie Miller was a witness in Oldham in Manchester. You were involved, I think, Katie, in the clean-up. What did they take?
Yeah, I was involved in the clean-up. Bang & Olufsen got trashed. There was the shops that got taken. There was the 3 shop. There was a jeweller's. There was absolutely ransacked. These aren't things people need. These are things people want, and there's a massive difference.
All things he could sell. They stole keyboards from Dawson's music shop.
And all the things that society says you've got to have this if you want to be somebody. And that's part of the dilemma. If you take a community like ours, we have what's called, and many schools probably do, schools building fund that we ask families to contribute to. And family says, oh, but we can't afford it. But then the children turn up at school wearing 70 or 100-pound trainers. What's gone wrong with our value system?
Patsy McKee is from Mothers Against Violence. Patsy, what are your thoughts as we just bring this debate to an end?
I think it's about everything that I'm listening to and hearing. And for me, the most important is values. If you actually instill values in children, then as they get older, and they obviously will try things out, but I'm seeing a bit of everything here. And I'm hearing the young people's voice in all this. They're saying very much what our learned Reverend said. It's about things. They're valuing things. Things are more important than people.
Patsy, we'll leave it there.
Things
Thank
are more
you
important
so much.
than themselves.
Patsy McKee from Mothers Against Violence, thank you. We have to end it there because your text poll vote is in. We asked, should national service be compulsory for all young people? Could it be an answer? Here's what you told us. 74% of you who texted in said yes, it should. 26% said no. Rose, national service, possible solution?
No. Families. Families, we've got to go back to the community. We've got to go back to families and parents and fathers. You know, we need to build the foundation of our community life. And I'm going to say this, faith.
Douglas?
Just quickly, I mean, what we've seen in the last week, a nation wondering what it is, looking at itself in the mirror and wondering about it. You know, when the Pope came here last year, he said, I'm not a Catholic, but it was a very interesting comment. He said, you have to ask yourselves as a society what it is you want to be. That question has come up that week, and I think we are very unhappy with the answer.
On those papal thoughts, let's
Yes.
leave it. Thanks
For
to
the
all of
Bullingdon
you
Club,
who've taken
National
part
Service.
today. Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin, Terry Christian, who's speaking right till the end, Douglas Murray and Sheldon Thomas, who joined us earlier. Please don't text or call the phone lines anymore. They are now closed, but you can continue the conversation online. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.